Hello, and welcome to Principles of Microeconomics. This is Module 6, and in this video, we will discuss factors of production. So recall that a factor of production is the inputs that a firm uses to produce goods and services. We have three broad categories of factors of production: land or natural resources, labor or workers, and capital, specifically physical capital, such as machines, tools, and factories. What we see is that the market for factors of production is very similar to the market for goods and services, in that the price of factors of production is determined by supply and demand. There is one key difference, though, in this market compared to the market for goods and services, in that the fact that the demand for factors of production is called derived demand. Specifically, it is derived from the firm's need to produce final goods and services. So the demand for factors of production comes from the production decisions of firms. So as an example, let's look at labor as a factor of production. Households supply labor. They supply the workforce. And firms demand labor. They're going to demand the number of workers depending on how much of a given good or service they want to produce. The demand for labor will be a downward sloping line. As you can observe here, on the x-axis we have the quantity of labor, and on the y-axis we have the wage or the price of labor. The demand comes from the firms. When the wage rate is high, we'll call this WH for high wage, the demand for workers is going to be low. On the other hand, if the wage rate is low, as we see here, then the quantity demanded of workers is going to be high. So the firm is going to be more willing to hire more workers at lower wage rates because it will be cheaper for them to have the workers to produce the goods and services. Shifts in demand are going to come from three factors. First, when we have a change in output prices. So if the price of the good or service that the firm is producing rises, then the firm wants to produce more of that good. Therefore, they need to hire more workers, and their demand for labor will rise. Secondly, technological progress. With technological progress, each worker becomes more productive. Therefore, the firm needs to hire less workers overall to produce the same amount, and therefore their demand for labor will decline. And lastly, the supply of other factors. If other factors, such as natural resources or capital, become scarce, then overall the firm can produce less, and therefore it will have less demand for workers and less demand for labor. Now let's look at the supply of labor. The supply of labor comes from households. We can simply think of ourselves. We supply labor into the labor force. We are looking for jobs, and in exchange for a wage rate, we are offering our services as workers. The same thing is true when we look at the market. So, at a low wage rate, we see that we have a low quantity of workers. Quantity of labor is low. On the other hand, when we have a high wage rate and people are being paid a lot of money, then more people want to work. So the quantity of labor is going to be high. So we see that we have a positive relationship between the wage rate and the quantity supplied of labor. Shifts in the supply of labor are going to come specifically from a change in the number of workers. If there are more workers entering the workforce, then we'll have a shift in the supply and there will be more workers at each wage rate. Now, when we bring the supply and demand together, we see that the demand for labor by firms is going to tell us the number of jobs that are available for workers. And the supply of labor by the household is going to tell us the total number of workers that are available. Now, at the point where the number of workers equals the number of jobs, which we'll call point A, this will be our equilibrium. So that we have the equilibrium wage, we'll call this WE, and the equilibrium quantity of labor. So that the number of workers is exactly equal to the number of jobs available. So the demand for labor is equal to the supply of labor. Now, the factors of production are all closely linked together. We see that the productivity of one factor is going to influence the usage of other factors. Any change in the supply of one of the factors is going to affect the productivity and the earnings of all of the other factors. So therefore, the firm must take into account the changes in productivity and the changes in availability of one factor and how it'll affect the productivity of all of the other factors that it needs to use for the production of goods and services. Thank you so much for joining me in Module 6 on the factors of production.